Hi, my name is Liz, and this is my story. So, my parents immigrated to America when I was 3 years old. And the farthest memory of my childhood that I have is being 3 years old and my dad putting us on a bus and saying goodbye. And that was a moment that I did not realize in the moment that it had shaped me for my whole entire life. But it did, because what I didn't know is that that goodbye would be for 3 years. And what my mom did know was that I would not see my dad for a lot of years before I was able to finally hug him again. So a year after that, my mom immigrated to America, and we grew up with our grandparents in Mexico. And so our parents did everything that they could to provide for us. But the living conditions that we lived in were not the best. And it's not necessarily because of what we did or we didn't have, but it was more of like the way that our grandparents chose to raise us was the way that they had raised my mom. And it was very physically and verbally abusive, not in a way that you could say it was very dangerous, but I have this really, really old memory of I was really little and we didn't have showers. So I didn't want to take a shower because it was outside and it was cold. And so I remember my grandmother was she had a stick, but it wasn't a stick, it was a metal rod. And she was chasing me around the yard, trying to hit me so that I would take a shower. And so for the majority of my toddler years, up until I was about 5, I grew up in a place where I was told that I was loved and that God was good, but still physically and verbally abused. I remember I used to sing at the top of my lungs and they would be like, nobody wants to hear you. And as I've gotten to know myself and who God created me to be, I've learned that even in those formative years, the enemy was trying to destroy everything that God had positioned in me for me to live the life that I live today. And so I'm just going to share with you guys a little bit about my testimony and how I got to be where I am today. When I was 6 years old, my parents brought us to America. And it was the first time since I was 3 that I saw my dad. And since I was 4 that I got to see my mom. And it was one of the things that I remember was I didn't recognize them as my parents because they didn't look like I remembered them looking. And it was fine for maybe 6 months. We lived in Oak Cliff and my dad was like, I'm not going to raise you here. We lived here, but we're going to give you something better. And so we ended up moving to some apartments in Duncanville. And I remember being the happiest in that apartment versus sometimes you think the more that you have, the better that you are. But for the most part, my memories of my childhood are better when we had less than when we had more, because the next thing that I can recall, I remember being a little girl and not knowing who God was, but I always had a heart for him. So I can remember my furthest memory back is being 4 years old and wanting to stack ladders on top of each other so that I could get to heaven and talk to God. And this is a 4-year-old. And I remember being around 7 or 8, and we had friends that lived here in the States and they were Christian. And so they would always go to church. And so if I got invited to a party or I got invited to church, I would always pick church because there was just something inside of me that came alive. And it was just I turned 9 years old and I remember telling my parents, I want to get baptized. And so I was baptized in a bathtub of someone's home because they were Christian. My dad was Catholic, but he would let me go. And that's the last memory that I have of me actually at that age wanting to know God and getting to know God. Because shortly after that, we bought a house. And I always tell people it feels like that house was the house of horrors. That was the house where I learned what family dysfunction could actually be like. And in that house is also where I felt like I lost everything. And so fast forward, we move. I'm now in 3rd grade and I am the top student. I learned English in less than 6 months. I was a straight A student, all A's, honor rolls, scholarships. I got invited. Like I found envelopes inside of my mom's memory box. I've been getting invited to like meet the president for my academics since I was like in second and third grade. And in second grade, I didn't even speak English. And so when we moved into that house, my parents began to argue and they began to fight. And I remember when I was 9 years old, right after we moved into that house, I wanted to get colors in my hair. And our family friend that used to take us to church, I will never forget, she told me, she said, you know, God doesn't like little girls that color their hair. And so right around that time, she gave me like 2 red streaks in my hair. And right around that time, my parents began to argue. They began to fight. My dad would physically hit my mom. My mom would go off on my dad. It was just kind of like, I did not understand why they had brought us here if that was what we were going to see, because it felt a lot worse than being chased in the patio with a metal rod, right? I could at least run away from them. Here, there was no running. Like in my room, I could still hear it. And that led like to a journey of just like watching my parents like fall out of love with each other. And I remember being so confused because I was like, I don't understand. Like, you brought us here to be with you as a family together. And I remember I would look in the mirror and I would try to talk to God, and I would be like, if you make this stop, I will never dye my hair again. Like, I'll be a good girl, I promise. And shortly after that, I remember waking up in the middle of the night, and for some reason, I think I fell asleep in my mom's room. And I remember I was asleep, and all of a sudden I like woke up and I opened up my eyes, and my dad was putting his clothes in trash bags. And I was like, Dad, what are you doing? And he was like, go to sleep. I'll see you in the morning. And when I woke up, my dad wasn't in the house, and he never moved back in with us. And that kind of like sent my mom on a trajectory of like depression that at the time I didn't understand. And because I didn't understand, it broke me in ways that I did not know I could be broken. It destroyed the way that I viewed marriage. It destroyed the way that I viewed family. And it hardened my heart towards God. So this was all around like 9 years old. And during that time, I remember being so confused. And I remember trying to comfort my mom. Like, I remember she would cry and I would be like, it's going to be okay. Like, we're going to be okay. And I was like super positive all of the time. And then I'll never forget, I don't remember exactly how old I was when this happened, but my mom loaded us up into the car and she said, we're going to go meet your dad. And so in my head, I was like, okay, great. Like, they're going to get back together. Like, this is going to be great. And we get to some apartments, and mind you, it's the middle of the night. It's pitch black, and she's banging on a door. And my dad opens the door, and he is with the woman that he cheated on my mom with. And my mom is like, this is why you left. And I remember being so confused because we used to play with these ladies' kids. And I was like, no, that's his friend. Like, we come, like, we have play dates. And because of that, my mom was like, wait, you knew? And I was like, wait, no, I didn't. Like, I am still like 9, 10 years old, and I'm still super confused because I don't know what's happening. And that was the first time that my mom tried to do something that I think to this day, like when me and her talk about it, she doesn't really remember much of it, but she has like since then like apologized, and we've had conversations about like, do you remember like what happened that night? And she tried to ram the car into a fence. And that marked the beginning of me, one, distancing my heart from God, but also being so confused. And as I talk about it right now, like I feel like there's so many things that can happen in our life that leave us with so much confusion that it leads us astray. I can definitely say that around that same age, like I was introduced to drinking and drugs. And I know that that's like a very young age to even consider like doing anything. And like now when I hear of like, oh, third graders vaping in a bathroom, you know, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's outrageous. Like my niece is in first grade, you know? But going back and looking at my story, I'm like, man, I was that little kid. Like I was that little broken kid trying to figure out a way to numb the pain that I didn't understand. And that changed the way, not only the way that I showed up, but it changed like my life in a whole completely different way. I became rebellious. I became self-sufficient. I didn't need anybody. I didn't want anybody. My mom became a single mom overnight. And there was a season of our lives where we had like babysitters, and then my mom couldn't afford it anymore. And so at the age of about like 10 or 11, like I became my brother's primary caretaker. So we would go to school, we would come home, I would help him with homework, I would cook dinner. And now when I look at that, I'm like, all of the things that I had to do, I matured too quickly, but I matured too quickly in a way that it hardened my heart, and it made me feel like, what is this? Like, what is life, you know? And as I kind of grew up and out of that space, like I remember I just wanted it to stop. Like I wanted the pain to stop. I wanted not to feel anything. I wanted not hear anything. Like there was no drive inside of me to do anything good. It was just kind of like, if I can just get through another day, like this is great. But at some point around that same age, I started struggling with suicide and depression. And I did not know it was depression. I just remember I was always angry. You couldn't tell me anything. I would always talk back. And I remember that the reason that I actually ended up in counseling is I hit somebody in school, and they were like, she needs help. And so we ended up in a therapy program through Dallas County. And that was when I was diagnosed for the first time with bipolar disorder at the age of like maybe like 10 or 11, because I did not have a way to express myself except for violence. And so it was not only what I had seen, but it's like, oh, you want to talk crazy? Like, I'll show you what crazy is, right? And I remember being so angry and getting through elementary, like, it was one of the hardest things. I drove by my childhood home a couple of days ago, and I was telling my friend, I said, we used to live in that house, and sometimes we didn't have money to pay the bills. So we used to have to shower with cold water, and we used to like just eat whatever people would give us, you know? And I think like hearing those things now just reminds me not only how strong I am, but how God never really left me. Like we used to make like showering in the cold fun. We'd put on our bathing suits and we'd make it a game. Like my brother he's 2 years younger than me. And so I would always like go first and try to like give him a different picture. But my brother wasn't dumb. Like he was young, but he wasn't dumb. And I think that the way that I've been able to like now process everything, thankfully, and how I am today and how he is today, like it just reminds me that the kindness of God endures and that he will always pursue us. And so I went on this road of like rebellion, partying, drinking. My friends were 4 or 5 years older than me all of the time. So like when I was in high school, I was sneaking out of the house. I was going to parties, and I think I began to bury my first friend when I was about 12 years old because I wasn't hanging out with the right people. I was hanging out with kids who were doing drugs, who were partying. And I remember telling people like, growing up, I was a party girl. Like I loved to dance. I loved to drink. And like we would go to parties and they would get shot up and we would just be like, okay, great. Like let's go to the next stop. And I was so desensitized to violence and to gun violence. And I was desensitized to drugs. Like for me, I didn't see the harm in it because it was like keeping me alive. You know, it was like, if I drink this or if I take this, I don't have to feel anything, right? And as I grew more in that space of like drinking and doing drugs, I distanced myself from God. Like now there was no God. Like I wasn't looking to go to church. I was looking to get high. I was looking to skip school. I was looking to feel validated and affirmed and all of these things by people. And I was still performing. Like it was just my life, like the way that I see it now, sometimes it feels like it's not mine. Like when people see who I am today and what I've been able to accomplish and where I am, nobody believes that that is the place that I came from. And it's one of the reasons that I'm an advocate in my community, because I think that when we look at children, and they're called latchkey kids, when we look at kids that are troubled, that are angry, and we label them or we want to separate them, we're missing the point. Like young adults and children that are doing drugs, that are having sex, that are partying, like they are not doing it because they think this is fun. They are trying to self-medicate with what the world says will give them fulfillment. And so fast forward, like I get through high school. So I had some really amazing teachers right about like, I think it was 10th grade before I went to 11th grade. They basically sat me down and they were like, hey, you have truancy, you haven't met the attendance requirements. If you don't do something different, and if you don't get straight A's for the rest of the semesters, like you're gonna flunk. And in my head, I was like, there's no way. There's no way, because I didn't even flunk when I didn't speak English. And so I decided that I wasn't going to go party anymore. Like I focused, I didn't skip school anymore. And I ended up graduating. I was not in the top 10%, but I ended up graduating high school. And I will never forget, one of the classes that I used to skip all of the time was world geography, because it was so easy and it was so boring. And I already knew the answers. So it was just easy to skip and still get an A. And the teacher that was my world geography teacher, who failed me with like a -50, was one of the teachers that was at our commencement ceremony when we graduated. And I remember he was like standing behind me or something, and I like bumped into him, and he was like, oh, I'm sorry. And he looked at me and he said, wait, you're still here? And I was like, well, what do you mean? Like, where else would I be? And he said, well, at the rate that you were going, he said, I thought you'd either be dead or you had dropped out, like I didn't expect for you to graduate. And that stuck with me, because that told me that the life that I was living was telling people who I would become. But I'm so grateful that I had two teachers who not only saw me, but they saw my potential. Like they would sit me down and they would be like, I understand who you think that you are right now, but that's not who you are. They put me in Skills USA. They taught me how to public speak. I did projects and presentations, and I made it to state, and then I made it to nationals. And they really believed that something inside of me was great. And they were the ones that kind of helped to push me through graduation, because I remember, like, when your parents bring you to America, they're like, oh, we brought you here for a better life. Like, you have like this responsibility to do X, Y, and Z. And none of that mattered, because of the way that my life had been. I lost respect for my dad. Like, my mom did the best that she could, and I so love her, but she wasn't really present. And so it was like I was raising myself. And I have a friend who used to tell me, she's like, it's like the wind raised you. Like, how are you this like remarkable human being if the wind raised you? And now I can very, very strongly say the wind didn't raise me, God did. And as I got through those years, like I remember I would always excel. Like I can now see the hand of God in my life, because anything that I did, I was successful at. Like I went to work in fast food, and then I became like a shift leader, and then I became a manager. And it was always like that. Like I would always go into a place, work for a little bit, and then get promoted, right? And now I can recognize that that was a favor of God, but at that point in time, I just thought that I was great, right? And that was the beginning of like where pride became like a very big thing in my heart. And that pride is ultimately what separated me from God. It wasn't that he wasn't looking for me. It wasn't that he wasn't there. It was that there was so much hurt and so much pain in my heart and so much pride that I wasn't willing to believe that he even cared or that he even existed. And I'll never forget, right before I moved out of my mom's house, there was a woman who immigrated from Colombia, and she brought her kids over for me to babysit. Mind you, I was wasted. I was so hungover. I think I slept through half of my babysitting job. And then I woke up because I had to go to work, and she looked me in the eyes and she said, God loves you. And I remember with so much arrogance and with so much pride, I said, I don't know what God you're talking about, but the God that I know probably wants nothing to do with me, and I could care less about him. And I walked out of the house and I went to work. And that was the last time that I can tangibly remember somebody intentionally trying to tell me that there was a God that loved me and wanted me. But the pride in my heart and the rejection and the fear and the pain had made me so hardened that I didn't want anything to do with him. Mind you, from the time that I was 9 up until that time, I was always contemplating on ways to not exist. And the only thing that kind of kept me going was like, okay, if I'm not here, like, who's going to take care of my brother? Like who's going to like help my mom? And I became an income provider at the age of 13. Like besides taking care of my brother, I would have jobs, and it was the only way that we survived, right? And no child should ever have to do that. But it was what we needed. And my mom never forced me. I was the one that was like, Mom, I can work. Like, Mom, I can help. And it shaped my work ethic and it shaped who I am today. But I remember feeling so cheated. Because my friends, we would go places and they would have money and their parents would pay, and I couldn't. We didn't have it. It was either pay the rent and buy food or go to the movies with your friends, right? And so there was so much resentment in me because I did not know what it was like to be provided for or taken care of, And when I was 17, I got into a disagreement with my mom and I left the house. I had bought a car. And so I packed everything that I could fit into my car and I ran away from home. I was like, you know what? You don't want to see me. I don't want to see you. I don't want to live with you. I'm gone. And I ran away and I went to go stay with the guy that I was dating at the time, his sister. She had a little den and it had a bed, and I went to go stay with her. And I stayed with her maybe for 3 weeks, and then I got a job and I got an apartment. And the only thing that I could afford in that apartment was a mattress, right? And it was just so funny to me because I was like, I would rather live here by myself with nobody telling me what to do. But that was when the mental torment really happened. In moments when you're all alone and you're contemplating not existing, that's where the enemy can come and he can lie to you and he can tell you I remember, I think I was maybe 6 months out, 6 months living on my own, and I was cooking, and I remember having this thought the world would be such a better place if you didn't exist. And I was like, I think that's true. It was a thought, and then I came into agreement with the thought. And so from that moment on, I would contemplate what's the easiest way for me to go that is painless and that people won't think someone killed me because I don't want anybody to go to jail for this, right? And those were the things that I was thinking as a 17-year-old. I was thinking what is the best way to not exist but also not get anybody in trouble? And around that same time, I I was working to everybody that saw me, I was full of life, I was full of joy, but on the inside I was dying. On the inside I wasn't worth anything. It wasn't worth living. My life became this high, it was a roller coaster of really high highs when I was around people and really low lows when I was by myself. And I'll never forget, it was Easter of 2022. No, I was born 13/12. Yeah, 2012. Easter of 2012. I felt there was something missing. And I remember being I didn't used to feel like this when I went to church. Mind you, at this point, I'm no longer in a relationship with the family that used to take me to church because I did something that deeply hurt their daughter and they stopped talking to me. And I don't know anybody in my life that's a Christian except for that one lady that I told, God doesn't love me, and I remember being there has to be something different. And so I did my rounds. I visited all of the Catholic churches that I remember going to for quinceañeras that I remember. And I remember I would get so angry because I would go into these churches and I would leave feeling filthy or even worse than when I came in. And it was the Sunday before Easter and I had visited St. Cecilia. And I was just so angry. I was kicking the rocks and I was you know what? This is stupid. This is the stupidest thing ever. I was I don't want to do this anymore. I was you know what? Next week is Easter. I'm going to go to the church with the Easter egg hunt. And one of the parts of my life that I felt I did not know at the time was significant, but became so significant in my story is my mom began to work for some restaurant owners that were Christians. And when they found out that she was a single mom and that we were sleeping on the floor, they bought us beds. They bought us washing machines because I used to have to go from the third floor all the way to the laundromat, with all of our clothes. And we had washer and dryer connections, but we didn't have money for them. So they bought us washing machines. And I remember my life changed after that a little bit. I remember that my mom could come home one of the weekends and spend time with us. She wasn't having to work 72 hours straight. And that was really important because I remember like there were days when my mom wouldn't come home. And for most of this, like we didn't have a car, so my mom would work. She would walk an hour to work and then she would walk overnight. And I remember I was just always so afraid of like, what if something happens to her, you know? And these individuals on Easter Sundays every year for the time that my mom worked for them, they would pick us up on Easter Sunday and they would let my mom, I think the restaurant was open at the time on Sundays. And so they would let my mom work the early shift. They would pick us up for church. They would take us to the Easter egg hunt and then they would let her out early and we would go to a fancy restaurant and we would all eat. And I all I could remember was the Easter egg hunts. I never went inside of the church, but I remembered the Easter egg hunts. And so I remember walking out of that church feeling empty and was like, I'm going to go next Sunday to the church with the Easter egg hunts. And that's how I ended up at Trinity. And that was Easter of 2012. I came to church and I sat in the nosebleeds. That's why, like, when I'm in worship, I always look at the nosebleeds and I pray because I remember being there in so much darkness and feeling like nobody could see me and feeling like, I wonder if people know that I don't want to exist and I wonder if there's something different. And that Easter, we had an illustrated sermon and Pastor Jim preached. And I remember he was like dressed like, I don't know, like, full costume. Like it was really funny to me at the time because I did not understand like what he was doing. I was like, who are you? Like, I didn't know anything about the Bible, right? And so at the end of that Easter service, like I remember I bought a dress because that's what I did remember. When you go to the church with the Easter egg hunts, you have to wear a nice dress. So I bought a dress and I went to church. And at the end of the sermon, he gave an altar call. And before he could even finish the altar call, I felt my body like get up from the chair and walk to the altar. And I gave my life to Jesus that Sunday. And I wanted to still live a double life. Like I wanted to go to the clubs on Saturdays and then come to church on Sundays. And it was just so much of like, I did not understand that you couldn't do that. And I was still living that life in that way. And I will never forget that I came back for a couple of months after, but I was not connected. I was not in community because I responded to the altar call. Like people from the church at the time, Pastor Lisa was the prayer pastor and they would like take your name and they would follow up with you if you gave your heart to Christ. And I would always ignore the phone calls because I'd be like, I don't have time for you. And my ex now, but at the time he was my boyfriend, he convinced me. He was like, you think going to church is going to make a difference? Like you're never going to change. Like you're always going to be who you are. And so I stopped going. And so I went from March, April, maybe around May, I stopped coming. And then we fast forward to November. I was just living my life, right? And I ended up going to renew my birth control. And my doctor had been my doctor since I was a kid. Like she was my pediatric doctor. And when I became an adult, like she was like, I'm going to treat you for like 3 more years. And then I really can't be your doctor because I'm not a family practitioner. Like I'm a pediatrician. And I was like, okay. But because of like just like challenges with my health that I had like growing up, I was on birth control since the time that I was like 12. And I remember that I went to go refill my birth control and they made me like pee in a cup. And I was like, can I just have my prescription? Like I want to go. And she was really, really, really quiet. And I remember that she walked into the room and she was like, I can't renew your prescription. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, why? And she was like, I want you to have a seat. Because at this point, like, I just wanted to get out. I wanted to go do the next thing. And she was like, I want you to have a seat. Mind you, I am now 19 and I'm an adult and nobody's with me. It's just me and her. And she said, I want to talk about your options. And I was like, options? Like, for what? Like, am I dying? Like, what? And she said, no, you're pregnant. And I was like, no, there's no way. Like, I'm on birth control. Like, I can't get pregnant. Like, I'm on birth control. And she said, no, like, it's not 100%. It's like 99.99. Like, there's that 1%. And I was like, no, no. Like, and she's like, let's talk about your options. And I remember telling her, like, no. I was like, it's a baby. Like, no, you don't have options. Like, it's a life. Like, you protect life. And she was like, are you sure? She's like, you're really young. And I was like, no, I'm sure. It's my baby. I'm going to have it. And she was like, are you sure? And I was like, yeah. And she gave me a referral to a clinic. And I went back and I told my boyfriend at the time. And he was like, you're lying. And I was like, no, the doctor said, the paper says, like, I'm not lying to you. And I took 3 pregnancy tests and they were all positive. And I described that part of my life like, for the longest time, it was like a black hole that I couldn't remember. And it was one of the darkest seasons of my life because for a long time, I think the trauma that I endured during that season was so much that I couldn't remember a thing. Like anytime that I would try to remember what that felt like, what I looked like, the people in my life, what I was doing, it just felt like a big black hole. And I, at the time, was severely anemic. I was sick. And most of the time, like if I wasn't working, like I was in bed because I was just always so tired. I was super skinny. I wasn't eating right. And I remember him telling me, like, are you sure you want to do this? Like, are you sure you want to have a baby? And I remember saying, like, yeah, like, this is it. And over the course of maybe like weeks, I want to say maybe about 2, it was just all of these thoughts. It was, now I can remember them, but for the longest I couldn't. And I used to say like, oh, he made me. But part of my journey with God and my healing journey was learning to take accountability for my decisions and my pride and what I wanted to do versus what I knew was right. And I remember he was like, why don't we just make an appointment, go to a clinic, you get an abortion, we'll pretend it never happened. Nobody knows, nobody will ever know. And I remember saying, no, I don't want to do that. But over the course of time, like anytime I was alone, it was like these thoughts. And it was like, do you want to be a single mom like your mom? You know what it's like to raise a kid without a dad. Like, you know what it's like to not have food. You know what it's like to sleep on the floor. And for most of my childhood, like, it wasn't intentional, but at times we slept on the floor. We didn't have food, you know, and like everything about my childhood would come back to haunt me and just tell me, like, if you choose to have this baby, like, this is what you're choosing for the baby. And I remember being like, man, I don't want to do that. And so finally I agreed and I said, okay, I'm going to call, I'm going to make an appointment. And I'll never forget because that day was like, it felt like winter and it was in the middle, like it was in the middle of heat and it felt like so cold. And we got in the car and made an appointment. And the abortion process is you go and you have like a consultation and then you come back the next day and you go through the procedure. And it's only like to make sure that that's really what you want. And I'll never forget walking in, there was a bus outside and they were offering free sonograms. And I remember like the girl was like super sweet and she came up and she was like, we'll give you a free sonogram. And I said, no, I don't want anything. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to see you. I need to get this over with. And I remember walking into this abortion clinic and it literally felt like walking into a freezer. Like I was wearing a jacket and a hoodie in the middle of summer and I still felt so cold. And I remember sitting there and going to the back, and I don't know that the sonogram still exists, but they gave me like a sonogram and I was 12 weeks pregnant at the time. And it looked like this little blob. And I remember I refused to look at it. They have to give it to you, but you don't have to look at it. And I refused to hear the heartbeat. And I think had I chosen to hear the heartbeat, I don't think that I would have made the decision that I made. But I was so desensitized and I was so exhausted and I was so tormented that I opted to not hear the heartbeat and I did not look at the sonogram. And so we went home, and then the next day, first thing in the morning, we went back. And they took me into the back room. And mind you, when you go there, like, you can't talk to anybody. Nobody can come with you. Like, it's just you and that person. And they're asking you, like, are you sure you want to do this? And this is what it means. And this is the different types of procedures. Like, this is what we recommend. And I remember sitting there, and I remember giving them my ID, and I remember signing all of the paperwork and taking the medicine and sitting. And the next memory that I have of me is like going into a back room, falling asleep, and then waking up, like, and they're walking me outside, and all I can see is the light. And it was over. It was done. And if I was suicidal before that abortion, I can guarantee you that I have not wished to not exist as much as I did post-abortion. And there are things that I've learned in my journey, in my healing journey with God, that I know now that it's the reason that I'm pro-life now, and it's the reason that I'm an advocate, that would have definitely changed my decisions. But I remember just feeling so lost. Like, I couldn't be left alone, because, like, my ex at the time, he would be like, I don't know what you're going to do. Like, I don't trust that you're not going to kill yourself. And I would be like, it'd be fine. Like, even if I did, I had no desire to live. Like, the depression and the, like, darkness that followed was, like, crazy. And what was even more crazy is that even though I had an abortion, my body continued to behave like I was pregnant. My hormones were still over the place. I still had, like, the signs. My stomach was still growing. I did not understand. And so I looked like I was pregnant, but I was not pregnant anymore. And I'll never forget that I defied God. I was living in an apartment by myself, and I grabbed a knife and I went to my bed, and I said, okay, God, like, if you're really real, like, you're not gonna, like, let me take my life. And right before, like, I had the abortion, I had gotten a puppy, because I was living on my own and I didn't want to be alone, because being alone felt really, really weird, and it was bad all the time. But I got a puppy. And I remember looking at my dogs, and I remember, like, thinking, like, who's going to take care of y'all? Like, if I don't exist, like, it was never about me. It was never about wanting to live. It was always about who I had to take care of. And I remember laying on the mattress, and my dog was, like, licking my arm, and I had a knife in my hand, and I said, God, if you're real, like, if you're really, really, really real, like, I don't want to exist anymore. And because I don't want to exist, like, I am willing to go through pain to not exist. But if you're really, really real, like, I want to know right now. And there was a song, and it began to play on my head, like, repeat. And there was a woman by the name of Elizabeth Clark who used to sing at Trinity. And during those short terms that I came and I visited, there was a song that she used to sing. And it basically, the song said, sing your song of redemption over me. Death no longer has a hold of me. You've given me the keys to victory. And it was a haunting sound. Like, I didn't want to exist, and I wanted to do everything in my power to not exist. And all I could hear was this song. And I cried and I cried and I cried and I cried myself to sleep, and I fell into a deep sleep, and I woke up the next day. And in my head, I was like, oh, it was a dream. I'm not that crazy. Like, I did not just try to take my life. But the knife was in my hand. Like, it was still there. And I was like, oh, that was not a dream. And I said, okay, well, you bought me a day. Like, I don't know what's going to happen, but you bought me a day. And I remember understanding that I now know that God is real, but I don't know what he could do to make this stop. And at the time, the woman that had told me that God loved me, that I kind of blew off, messaged me on Facebook, and she was like, hey, I don't know exactly what's happening, but God keeps putting you on my heart, and I can tell that you're struggling, but I don't really know why. She was like, but if you want something different, we have Bible study, and we're going to Prayer Mountain, and you're more than welcome to come. And I was like, I Googled where Prayer Mountain was, and I was like, oh, it looks like a desolate place. So like, if this is a scam and they're going to kill me, it's great. I'm still going to die, but it's not going to be at my hands. And that is like the space that I lived in for most of like from the age of 17 to like 19, like the desire to not want to exist, but also not be responsible for taking my life. And I went. I went, and I will never forget that day. There was a group of maybe like 5 or 6 women, and they were having Bible study at Prayer Mountain, and they had like hot chocolate. And actually, like when I got there, I only stayed because they had cookies and hot chocolate. Like I had no interest in hearing from God. I very much wished I didn't come because these people were happy and they were smiling, and I was not, and I did not want to be around them. And I remember they were talking about God, and they were talking about how amazing he was. And in my head, like I remember it was like they were talking about God. And in my head, I was like, of course, like you probably grew up in a house with parents. You probably don't know what it's like to go hungry. Like everything inside of me was judging them because I did not want to hear what they had to say about God. And towards the end, the lady leading the Bible study was like, okay, I'm going to pray for everybody, and then we're going to leave. And I like she began to lay hands on people, and people began to shake and fall. And I was like, bro, this is definitely a joke. Like, this is not for real. Like, why are you guys faking? Like in my head, like and that's where majority of our battle is. It's in our mind. And I remember like being like, bro, like, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you on the floor? Like, it was just this constant like back and forth, back and forth. And then it was my turn. And she came to me and she put her hand on my head. And the best way that I can describe this, it was like I felt the tangible, purifying fire of God. And my whole entire body was on fire. But it did not hurt. And for a split second, as she prayed for me, I remember I did not want to die. And so that moment, I know now, was the moment that God used to introduce me to his unconditional love. Like a love that never fails, a fire that purifies. And it's just so beautiful now to see. But in that moment, it was like a high. Like, and mind you, I had done all kinds of drugs. Like, I knew what it was like to be high, but that high, I had never experienced it in my life. And from that moment on, every time that I was invited to church, I would go, and I ended up back at Trinity because the Bible study was a Bible study for Trinity, and it was a part of the Hispanic ministry at the time, but it was all connected and it was all together. And every time the church was open, I was looking for that, like, I was looking for the darkness to leave me. So I came to Tuesday night prayer and Thursday night Spanish prayer and Wednesday night Bible study, and whatever in between existed, I changed, right? But I was still living in sin, like partying. And I will never forget, like, when I got saved, I realized that I couldn't live the life that I was living. And it took me a little bit. Like, it took me a little bit to let go of all of the things that I had brought into my relationship with God. And one of the things that I very much like wanted is like, I wanted to marry the man that I was dating. Because in my head, I had already made like this fairy tale life, and it was like, this is who we're going to be, and this is the type of family, and this is what I want. And I remember like I was saved, and I told him, I was like, we can't have sex anymore. Like I know Jesus, we can't, like, I can't do that. And he would be like, you're done. Like, what? And I was like, no, I'm sorry. And I'll never forget, like, I would negotiate with God. And I would be like, God, if you save him, like, we can do so much for the kingdom. And I would go back and forth with God, and to the point to where he got married a couple of months after, and I was still in a relationship with him because he was like, it's fake, like, it's not for real. And he really made me believe that. And I had the Lord, and he gave me an ultimatum. And he said, what you are praying for, I can give you. He said, if you want this man to be your husband and you want the life that you are asking me for, he said, I will give it to you. He said, but I will tell you that he is not the very best that I have for you. And I was on my way to get ice cream. Like, I wasn't doing anything deep. Like, I wasn't at church. Like, I was in someone's kitchen reaching for ice cream. And God was like, I can give you what you want, but he is not the best for you. And I made the conscious decision that day to just let it go. And that's when the healing journey actually begun. Because a lot of the trauma and the things like that I had in the bond that I had with him, it was a trauma bond, right? And I did not let God into those spaces because he had those spaces. Like the spaces that made me feel safe, the spaces that made me feel protected, he had. And I wasn't allowing God into that place. And so from that moment on, my life completely changed. Like I began to go through deliverance and inner healing. And the most beautiful part about all of my journey and everything is that who I am today is exactly who God created me to be. But I didn't know that. And I remember, like, as I was healing from the codependent relationship with him, I remember God showing me everything that he had for me. And I was like, wait, I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, like to a million kids. Like, what is this world? Like, this is not who you created me to be. And God began to heal me. And I'll never forget, it was after a mass shooting that a woman that used to come to church posted about, like, if anybody needs therapy, like, I'm here, I'm a licensed therapist. And I remember messaging her and being like, I need therapy, but I cannot afford therapy. And she was like, hey, why don't you just come talk to me and we'll have a conversation. And what basically led me to that was I was doing everything. I was doing inner healing. I was doing deliverance. I was doing Bethesda. I was doing everything. And inside, I was still struggling with suicide. I was still struggling with not wanting to be here. I was still struggling with really high highs and really low lows. And nobody knew because on the outside, I was performing. I was social. I was showing up. And nobody would have ever known had God not just been like, hey, you need therapy. Like, there's no amount of prayer. There's no amount of this. Like, you have to process your life in a way that allows you to feel what you need to feel in order to overcome. And so for months, like, I would come to her couch and she would do sessions with me. And God is so kind because she, at the time, was like, I don't feel to charge you anything. She said, whatever you have, whenever you come, that's what you can give me. And that's how I'm going to treat you. And she began the journey with me to walk me through the healing of the abortion. Because at the time, nobody knew that I had had an abortion. I didn't know that the reason that I was still suicidal was because I had made a covenant with the spirit of death when I had the abortion. And nobody could explain it to me. Nobody could walk me through it. And I remember confessing it and being like, I had an abortion and I killed my baby. And the amount of compassion and empathy that she had with me to sit with me and process everything and walk me through what felt like the darkest valley in my life changed the trajectory of my life. And everything that I am today is because of the girl that I once was. Like, everything that I put my hands to, that I believe in, that I champion, that I advocate for, is because I have become the woman that I wish I would have had in my life when I was broken, when I was hurting, when I was lost. To this day, there have been a couple of young girls that feel led to tell me, like, oh, I'm pregnant and I want to have an abortion. And I get to share the testimony of my abortion and they choose life. Or girls who choose to confide in me that they've had an abortion and I get to share with them the testimony of healing on the other side of that. And so my life was radically and completely changed by Jesus because he didn't just love me, he pursued me. And as I have grown now and where I am today, like, I've learned to ask him, like, where were you in these spaces? Like, when this happened, like, where were you? And one of the places where he took me back was to that abortion room. Because I always thought that I was there by myself. And one of the very first things that he did in walking me through the healing journey is he showed me that even when I was going through the abortion, he was right there and he was holding my hand. And I have no recollection of this because I wasn't like aware, because I was so, like, they drug you to do the procedure so I had no remembrance of it. But I went back with the Lord to that abortion clinic and to that time. And he showed me that while they were doing the procedure, I was crying, but he was there and he was crying. And I remember when I finally decided, like, I'm going to live for God, I went and I decided, like, abortion shouldn't exist. Like, it just should not be a thing. And so I would drive outside of the clinic where I had my abortion, and I would pray and I would fast and I would ask God to shut down the clinic. And a couple of years later, that clinic was actually not only shut down, but the doctor that performed the procedure on me no longer has his credentials to operate as a doctor. And that was the first time that I realized that my place of pain could become my place of reign. That everything that I had endured could become a place where God could not only meet me, but he could transform not just my life, but the life of others. And it's the reason that I am a pro-life person. It's the reason that I legislate. It's the reason that I am vocal about the values and everything that I've endured. It's the reason that I openly talk to people about dealing with grief and depression, because I don't ever want somebody to be inside of the body of Christ and feel like what they are dealing with is just them, because that's how I used to feel. I'd be like, I'm broken, I'm the problem. When in reality, I just did not know how to process what I had inside. And so where I am today is I am an author. I'm a business owner. I am an intercessor. I serve on different city boards. There's a very beautiful part of my life with God where for seasons of my life, like, he calls me into different places. And one of the testimonies of healing post-abortion for me came from, there was an event in Washington, D.C., and it was called, it was a Rise Up event, but it was like Prepare Like Esther, Rise Like Deborah, and it was for women. And I remember I had just finished watching a TV show that was about Washington, D.C., and I was like, okay, I'm going to use my credit card and I'm going to fly out to Washington, D.C. And I told God, I said, I'm going and I'm going to do this. I said, but the only way that I'll go is if you tell me a secret that only you know. Like, no man could tell me, like, it's something that only you know. And at the time we were there, and it was like a multiple day event, and the last day, it was raining, so we decided that we were going to pray. And so I was like, hey, God, like, we made a deal. Like, you're supposed to tell me a secret. And I'm laid out and I'm prostrated before the Lord and I'm praying. And I hear the Lord say, Hadassah will not be your last. She was your first. And I have her in heaven and you have her on earth. Will you finish running the race for her? And I was so, like, confused, but I understood what he meant. I had in my life created like this narrative of, like, I want to have 5 kids and I'm like, the last one will be like a girl and she'll be the baby and I'll love her the most because I don't know, like, I just was like, this is how many kids I'm going to have and this is going to be my last child. And I fell in love with a daughter that I didn't even have. And what God was basically telling me was that the baby that I aborted was a girl and her name was Hadassah. And what unfolded after that was just such a beauty between God and me in that healing journey. Like, I've gotten to, like, have visions of her playing in heaven and hear her voice in dreams. And I never take that for granted, because I remember being so confused when I felt like God was calling me to government, because I knew he made me for business. My mom used to say that when I was 3 years old, she used to sell Tupperware, and I would tell people that it was the best Tupperware, and we would leave with a wagon and come back with an empty wagon. So I knew that business was, like, in my blood since I was like a child, right? And so I was so confused when he started opening doors in government. And what he revealed to me in that place of prayer is that my daughter's call on the earth was for government, and that I could pick up the mantle and I could finish the race for her. And so it's the reason that I don't limit myself and I don't put myself in a box. And yes, I advocate for government. Yes, I run campaigns. Yes, I do X, Y, and Z. But every time that I do that, it's a way of getting to know not only who my daughter would have been, but the destiny that she had on earth. And so I don't stop building what God is asking me to build, but I continue to build, understanding and knowing that I also have a legacy to protect that belongs to her. And that every time that I refuse to bow down to fear and intimidation in government and in politics, not only am I glorifying God, but I am honoring the memory of my daughter. And everything that I've worked up into this point is nothing without him. Like in this season, the more that I learn about him and the character of God, like his character is unfailing. Like even recently, like he's been teaching me, like the only one that will never fail me is him. And allowing him to take me back to those places of pain and sit with me in them and show me where he was, not only restores my soul, but it gives me hope. And it gives me language to talk to people who are in the very broken places that I once was. And so if I could leave you with anything, it's build anyway. Who cares? Who cares if you grew up with nothing? You can build something with him. Who cares if you're the least likely to be picked? He chose you. And that's more than enough. If he chose you and he designed you and he created you, you can do anything that he called you to, not because you're capable, but because he's capable and because he can and he will do great things through you.